He was gone before the sun had a chance to burn the chill from the air. One day, his laughter filled their small cabin. The next, a fever stole it, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like its own kind of death. The woman, half Apache, sat in that silence, her 3 young daughters clinging to her like leaves to a fallen branch. She was 30 years old, but grief had aged her 100 years in a single night. And in a town this small, a secret is like a cough in a church. Everyone hears it. By the second day, her private sorrow was public property. The whispers started low, like snakes in dry grass. No one wants a widow, they'd say, especially not one with 3 daughters. Her beauty, once a thing of quiet admiration, was now seen as a trap. Her Apache blood, once exotic, was now a stain. She felt their eyes on her back when she walked to the trading post. Pity that turned sour in a heartbeat. It was a look that said, "You are a burden." A look that said, "You are alone." She remembered a man, a settler named Jeb, who used to bring her wildflowers and clumsy compliments. She'd thought, maybe, he would be there for her when the morning passed. She was wrong. When she saw him in the street, hollowed out and desperate, he took a step back, as if her grief was a sickness he could catch. His eyes slid past her, landing on anything else. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her standing in the dust of his dismissal. He didn't have to say the words. She heard them anyway. A woman with 3 young daughters is a fire that consumes everything. Her girls were too young to understand. They still chased butterflies. They still laughed at the funny shapes of clouds. She held their joy in her hands like a fragile bird, protecting it from the coldness of the world, even as her own heart turned to stone. At night, when they were asleep, she'd whisper her deepest fear to the dying embers of the fire. No man will ever stand beside us again. She thought she was speaking to the darkness. She had no idea the darkness was listening. One evening, a man appeared at the edge of town. He didn't ride in with a swagger. He moved with a quiet purpose, like he was part of the landscape itself. He was a cowboy, maybe 35, with dust on his boots and a silence that seemed older than the hills. His horse followed him without a rope, a shadow that chose to be there. She first noticed him at the trading post. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at her daughters. But it wasn't the usual look. Not pity, not calculation, the kind that tallied up the cost of 3 extra mouths to feed. It was a look of simple observation. He saw children. Just children. He bought a loaf of bread, broke off a piece, and set it down on a crate near the girls. He didn't say a word. He just nodded and stepped back, giving them space. It was a small gesture, but in her world of closed doors and cold shoulders, it felt like a miracle. It also felt like a warning, because men like that didn't just appear out of nowhere. He started showing up, not at her door, never that direct, but she'd see him, mending a neighbor's fence for free, guiding a lost calf back to its mother. He never asked for anything, he never spoke to her, he just existed. A quiet, steady presence on the edge of her life. And it terrified her. Scorn, she understood. Pity, she could endure. But this patient kindness? It was a language she no longer spoke. What did he want? Why was he here? The town had its own ideas, of course. The widow's getting desperate, they sneered, and that cowboy's a fool. She tried to ignore them, but their words were like poison ivy creeping into her thoughts. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was a fool, or maybe he saw something no one else did. One night, the fear became too much to hold inside. The girls were asleep, their breaths soft and even. She rocked by the fire, the words spilling out of her in a broken whisper. No one wants a widow with 3 daughters. A floorboard creaked in the darkness behind her. She wasn't alone. The cowboy stepped out of the shadows, his face half lit by the firelight. His voice was low and steady, solid as the earth beneath their feet. "I'll be their father now," he said. Her heart stopped. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a promise made to the night. She stared at him, unable to breathe, unable to think. Was this pity? Was this some strange kind of madness? Or was it something else entirely? She said nothing. She couldn't. He didn't push. He just gave a small nod, as if the deal was sealed, and melted back into the night. She lay awake until dawn, his words echoing in her mind. I'll be their father, now. It sounded like a vow. It also sounded like a threat, because she knew, deep in her bones, that this man was hiding something. The next morning, there was a stack of freshly chopped firewood by her door. He'd been there before sunrise and gone before she woke. The day after, he was on her roof, patching the shingles that had been leaking since the last rain. He didn't ask permission. He just did it. He started teaching her eldest daughter, Lily, how to ride his horse. His hands were gentle as he showed her how to hold the reins. He knelt in the dirt to tie her younger sister's shoes. He even braided the little one's hair, his rough fingers surprisingly deft. He was weaving himself into their lives, thread by thread, and every kind act felt like another knot tightening. The town's whispers grew louder, sharper. He's playing house, they'd say. It won't last. A man like that has his own life. He won't raise another man's kids. The words were like tiny cuts, and they bled. It hurt most when her daughters started calling him Pa. The sound was sweet, but it filled her with a terrible dread. One evening she watched him at the well, washing the day's dust from his hands. The setting sun cast him in bronze. She felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt since her husband was alive. Trust. And it was the most dangerous feeling of all, because trust could be broken, and a heart broken twice might never heal. That's when she started noticing the little things. The way he checked the horizon, not like a man admiring the view, but like someone watching for trouble. The way he never slept, with his back to a door. The faint, perfectly round scar just below his collarbone, the kind of scar a bullet makes. This wasn't a simple cowboy. This was a man who knew violence. A man who was running from something or hunting for something. And she and her daughters were standing right in his path. Jeb, the man who had rejected her, came swaggering back into town. He saw the cowboy, Silas, she'd learned his name was, lifting her youngest onto his horse. A cruel smirk split Jeb's face. He shouted across the dusty street, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Raising another man's brats, are you?" He spat the words out. The girls flinched. Ilara froze, shame and anger burning in her cheeks. Silas didn't even look at Jeb. He just kept his voice low and calm, reassuring the child until her fear passed. He absorbed the insult like a stone wall absorbs the wind. But that night, Ilara couldn't sleep. The town's judgment was a cage, and she was dragging Silas into it with her. The next morning, when he came by with a sack of flour, she was ready to tell him to leave. To tell him she didn't need his help. That he should go before he got tangled any deeper in her ruined life. He must have seen it in her eyes. He set the flour down on the porch step and looked right at her. His gaze didn't waver. "My life is my own," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I choose where to spend it. And I choose you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She turned away so he wouldn't see the tears, but a new, cold fear began to grow. He wasn't just helping, he was claiming them. Why? A man, this determined, this patient. He wasn't acting out of simple kindness. He wanted something. She just didn't know what it was. She decided to find out. That night, after the girls were asleep, she crept out of her cabin. She followed the path to the small lean-to where he slept, near the creek. There was no light, no fire. She thought he might be gone, but then she heard a low sound, whispering. He was talking, to his horse. She crept closer, hiding behind a thicket of willows. The moon was a sliver, casting long, distorted shadows. She could just make out his shape as he groomed the animal's flank. "Not much longer now, old friend," Silas was saying. "Soon as I find it, we're gone. Just a little more time." "Find what? Gone where?" Her blood ran cold. He continued, his voice so low she had to strain to hear. "It has to be here. This is where he was headed. The map was clear." Map? What map? Her husband? Had he been headed somewhere before the fever took him? She thought back to his last days. He'd been agitated, restless. He'd talked in his delirium, but she couldn't make out the words. She'd thought it was just the sickness. Now she wasn't so sure. Silas fell silent. He stood there, staring into the dark woods, perfectly still. Alara held her breath. Had he heard her? After a long moment, he sighed and led the horse into the lean-to. She waited until the silence was absolute before backing away, her mind racing. He wasn't here for her. He was here for something her husband had. Something valuable enough to make a man like him lie and wait and play the part of a savior. Every kind gesture, every gentle word, every moment he'd spent with her children. Was it all an act? A performance to get close to his prize? The trust she'd started to feel curdled into a bitter poison. He wasn't their protector. He was a vulture, circling. She had to know what he was looking for. She went back to her cabin, her heart pounding. She lit a single candle and began to search. She tore through her husband's few belongings, a worn-out coat, a spare shirt, a small wooden box with his carving tools. Nothing. She was about to give up when her hand brushed against the loose floorboard under their bed. Her husband had always told her it was warped, that he'd fix it one day, but he never did. Her fingers fumbled at the edge. She pried it up. Underneath, nestled in the dirt, was a leather pouch. It was heavy. Her hands trembled as she pulled the drawstring. It wasn't gold. It wasn't jewels. It was a thick bundle of papers, tied with a string. And on top, a folded, hand-drawn map. The map showed the area around their cabin. The creek, the big oak tree, the rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear. And there was an X marked on it, not far from their property. Her husband hadn't just been a simple farmer. He'd been hiding something dangerous. And Silas knew all about it. The storm hit without warning. The sky turned a bruised purple-black, and the wind screamed like a dying animal. Rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof. Alara gathered her daughters, her body a shield against the fury of the storm and the new terror in her heart. The man who had promised to be their father was a liar, a hunter, and the X on the map was his prey. Just as the roof began to groan, the cabin door burst open. It was Silas. He was soaked, his face grim. "The creek's rising!" he yelled over the wind. "We have to get to higher ground!" She stared at him, the map clutched in her hand behind her back. Could she trust him? Did she have a choice? He didn't wait for an answer. He scooped up her two youngest, one under each arm, and looked at her. "Now!" he commanded. He led them through the blinding rain, up the hill behind the cabin. The wind tore at them, trying to rip them from the earth. He found a small overhang, a shallow cave in the rocks, and pushed them inside. He stood at the entrance, his body blocking the worst of the wind and rain. A human shield. Even now, knowing he was a fraud, she couldn't deny the safety he provided. Her children, terrified, clung to him. They didn't see a liar. They saw their pa. The thought twisted a knife in her gut. As dawn broke, the storm passed. The world was washed clean, but her small cabin was a wreck. Part of the roof had collapsed. The storm had done in minutes what the town's scorn couldn't do in months. It had ruined them. Silas was still there, the youngest asleep in his arms. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear. He looked at her, then at the ruined cabin below. "I'll fix it," he said. "Why?" The word escaped her, sharp and bitter. What do you really want, Silas? He was silent for a long moment. He looked down at the sleeping child in his arms, his expression unreadable. It's complicated, he finally said. Try me, she shot back, her voice shaking with anger and fear. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. Your husband, Ilara, I knew him. We served together a long time ago. This was a twist she hadn't seen coming. Served where? That's the complicated part. We weren't soldiers. We worked for the Pinkerton Agency. Pinkertons. Gunmen for hire, strikebreakers, spies. The name left a bad taste in her mouth. Her husband had never spoken of such a life. He'd told her he was a farmer from the East. Another lie. Her whole life was built on lies. What did you want with him? She demanded. Our last job together, Silas said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. We were transporting a payroll for the railroad. Gold bullion. It was ambushed. Everyone was killed. Except me. And your husband. He vanished. So did the gold. It all clicked into place. The map. The X. Silas wasn't just a former colleague. He was a bounty hunter. He thought her husband had stolen the gold and hidden it. He was here to get it back. He wouldn't, she whispered. He wasn't a thief. Everyone has a price, Ilara, Silas said, his voice flat. The agency thinks he took it. They sent me to find it. They're not patient men. They want their property back, one way or another. The threat hung in the air. He wasn't just looking for gold. He was a shield, but also a sword. He was protecting her from the town, but he was also the agent of a much bigger danger. The Pinkertons. If they thought she had the gold, or knew where it was, they wouldn't hesitate to tear her life apart to get it. So this was all a lie, she said, her voice hollow. Fixing my roof, the children. It was all just a way to get to the gold. He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his stony exterior. She saw a flicker of something that looked like regret. It started that way, he admitted, but it's not that simple anymore. But she didn't believe him. How could she? The next few days were a blur of tension. Silas worked tirelessly to repair the cabin, his silence a heavy blanket between them. Ilara watched him, her mind a whirlwind of suspicion and fear. She kept the map hidden, a secret weapon and a terrible burden. If she gave him the map, he would find the gold and leave. She and her daughters would be alone again, but safe from the Pinkertons. If she didn't, how long would he wait? How long until his patience ran out and the protector became the predator? Jeb hadn't missed the drama of the storm. He saw Silas rebuilding Ilara's home, saw the way he stayed close, and his jealousy curdled into something uglier. He started spreading a new rumor. Not just that the cowboy was a fool, but that he was dangerous. He's got a darkness in him, Jeb would say at the saloon. A man that quiet is hiding something. And I heard things, heard he's wanted back east. He was throwing stones in the dark, but one of them was bound to hit. One afternoon, the town sheriff and 2 deputies rode up to the cabin. Jeb was with them, a smug look on his face. Silas, the sheriff called out. Got some questions for you. Silas didn't look surprised. He put down his hammer and walked out to meet them, wiping his hands on his trousers. Sheriff. This man, the sheriff said, hooking a thumb at Jeb, says you're a man named Silas Kane, a Pinkerton detective wanted for questioning in the disappearance of a railroad payroll. Silas's face was a mask of stone. He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. The silence was his answer. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. It was true. All of it. I'm here on private business, Sheriff, Silas said calmly. Private business that involves a widow and her land? Jeb sneered. Or private business that involves something buried on her land? Silas's eyes narrowed. How did Jeb know? Had he been watching them? Listening? The sheriff looked uneasy. Look, Silas, we don't want any trouble here, but a missing payroll, that's federal business. I can't just ignore it. There's nothing here for you, Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, a low warning rumble. Just then, Ilara's eldest, Lily, ran out of the cabin. "Pa!" she cried, running straight to Silas and hugging his leg. "Jeb was being mean again. He was looking in our windows last night." The air went still. Everyone looked at Jeb. His smug expression faltered, replaced by a flash of guilt. He had been watching. He had been spying. The sheriff's eyes hardened. He looked from Jeb's shifty face to Silas, standing firm with a child clinging to him. "Jeb, you go on home. Stop bothering these folks." He turned to Silas. "But I'm keeping my eye on you. Any trouble, and I'll have you in a cell before you can blink." The lawmen rode away, leaving a thick, poisonous silence behind. Jeb shot Silas a look of pure hatred before stomping off. The confrontation had changed everything. The secret was out. The whole town now knew Silas was a Pinkerton. They knew he was looking for something. Suddenly, the land around Ilara's cabin wasn't just a poor widow's plot. It was a treasure map. And now everyone was watching. That night, Ilara couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the secrets, the weight of the map she kept hidden. She confronted Silas as he sat by the fire, cleaning his pistol. "Is it true?" she asked. "Are they hunting you too?" "They're not hunting me," he said, not looking up from his work. "They're hunting the man who stole from them. They think it was your husband. They think I'm helping him." "Helping him?" she asked, confused. "But you think he stole it too." He finally looked at her, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "I did, at first, but I've been here for months, Ilara, watching, learning. Your husband wasn't a thief. He was in over his head." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "The men who ambushed that transport, they weren't simple bandits. They were professionals. Someone on the inside had to have tipped them off." A new, terrifying possibility opened up. "You think someone at the Pinkerton agency?" "I think the man they sent me here to find isn't your husband," Silas said grimly. "It's the man who set him up, the man who really took the gold. And I think he's getting close." "Who?" she whispered. Before he could answer, a rifle shot cracked through the night. A spark flew from the rock just inches from Silas's head. He moved faster than she thought possible, shoving her to the ground and drawing his pistol in one fluid motion. "Get the girls!" he hissed. "Get inside!" Another shot rang out, splintering the doorframe of the cabin. This wasn't the town's petty cruelty anymore. This wasn't about whispers or rumors. Someone was trying to kill them. Someone who wanted the map. They were trapped. Pinned down in the cabin, the girls crying in a corner. Silas stayed by the window, his pistol steady, his eyes scanning the darkness. "They won't risk coming closer," he said, his voice low and reassuring, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. "They'll wait for us to make a move." "Who are they?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling. "Pinkertons," he said. "Not the official kind. The kind they send when they don't want any witnesses. Led by a man named Thorne. He was my commander, and he was in charge of the payroll transport." The betrayal was staggering. The man in charge of protecting the gold was the one who'd planned the robbery. He'd framed Ilara's husband to cover his tracks, and now he was here to tie up the loose ends, her children, and Silas. "He thinks I have the map," Ilara said, the realization dawning on her. "He thinks I know where it is." "He's right, isn't he?" Silas looked at her, his gaze intense. "You found it." She hesitated for a split second, then nodded. "Under the floorboards." A grim smile touched his lips. "Your husband was smarter than they gave him credit for. He left you the key." He looked back out the window. "Thorne won't stop until he gets it. We can't stay here." "Where can we go?" "The X on the map," Silas said. "It's not where the gold is buried, Ilara. That's what your husband would want them to think. It's a trap, or a hiding place. It's our only chance." He laid out the plan. At the darkest point of the night, just before dawn, they would make a run for it. He would create a diversion, and she would take the girls and the map and run for the rock formation on the map, the one that looked like a sleeping bear. He would meet them there. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only one they had. The hours crawled by. Ilara held her daughters, whispering stories to them, trying to keep them calm. She looked at Silas, a silhouette against the window, a lone guardian against the darkness. He had lied to her. He had come here under false pretenses. But right now, he was the only thing standing between her family and a shallow grave. Just as the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky, he turned to her. "It's time." He handed her a small revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" She nodded. Her father had taught her long ago. "Good," he said. "Don't hesitate." He moved to the back of the cabin. He'd quietly knocked a few boards loose earlier. "I'm going to draw their fire to the west side. When you hear the shooting, you run east. Don't stop for anything. Go straight for the rocks. I'll be right behind you." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "Ilara, I'm sorry. For the lies." "Just get us through this," she said, her voice tight. He gave a sharp nod. Then he took a deep breath, kicked out the loose boards, and fired 2 shots into the trees. Immediately, the night exploded with return fire, all of it directed at the back of the cabin. "Go!" Silas yelled. Ilara didn't hesitate. She grabbed her 2 oldest by the hand, the youngest clutched in her other arm, the map and the revolver tucked into her dress. She scrambled out the front door and ran. She ran blindly, stumbling through the pre-dawn gloom, her lungs burning, the sound of gunfire echoing behind her. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She just ran towards the sleeping bear. The rocks were closer than she thought. She found a narrow crevice just big enough to squeeze into and huddled there with her girls, trying to quiet their frightened sobs. She peered out, her heart pounding. The shooting had stopped. An awful, heavy silence settled over the woods. Where was Silas? Had he made it? Or was he lying back there in the dirt, paying the price for his deception? Minutes stretched into an eternity. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was too bright. They were too exposed. Just as she was starting to lose hope, she heard a sound, a twig snapping nearby. She raised the revolver, her hand shaking. A figure emerged from the trees. It wasn't Silas. It was Jeb. He had a rifle in his hands and a greedy, triumphant look in his eyes. "Well, well," he said, his voice a low drawl. "Look what I found. The widow and her little birds." "What do you want, Jeb?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do you think I want?" he sneered. "Same thing everyone wants, the map. Thorne promised me a share if I helped him find you." He'd been working with them all along. His jealousy, his rumors, it was all part of their plan. He was their man on the inside. "Give it to me, Ilara," he said, taking a step closer. "And maybe I'll tell him I couldn't find you." "Stay back," she warned, the revolver aimed at his chest. He laughed, a nasty, cruel sound. "You won't shoot me, you don't have the nerve." He took another step. From behind him, a voice spoke, calm and cold as a grave. "She won't have to." Jeb spun around. Silas was standing there, his face bruised and bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive, and his pistol was leveled directly at Jeb's heart. Jeb's face went pale. He tried to raise his rifle, but he was too slow. Silas didn't shoot. He moved forward, his steps silent, and brought the butt of his pistol down in a swift, brutal arc. Jeb crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Silas didn't even glance at him. He looked at Ilara, his eyes filled with relief. "Are you all right?" She could only nod, the adrenaline making her weak. He came to her, kneeling down in front of the girls, speaking to them in a low, soothing voice. He was their protector again. The lies didn't seem to matter as much anymore, but it wasn't over. Thorn? She asked. He's coming, Silas said grimly. He knows I'm alive. He and his men are sweeping the woods. We don't have much time. He looked at the map in her hand. Your husband really did leave you a key. Where does it lead? She unfolded it. The X was in the heart of the rock formation. Not a cave, but a specific spot marked under the mother stone. She looked around. There was one large flat rock that did look like a sleeping animal, larger than the others. The mother stone. They scrambled over the rocks. Underneath the main ledge, hidden by shadows and overgrown vines, was a small concealed opening, just big enough for a person to crawl through. It led into a small, dark cavern. This is it, Silas said. Get inside, all of you. What about you? Alara asked. Thorn is hunting me, not you, he said. He thinks I'm the one who knows his secret. I'm going to lead him away from here. Give you time. No, she said. We're not separating. Not again. He looked at her, surprised by the fire in her voice. Alara, whatever is in there, she said, pointing to the cavern, we face it together. For the first time, a genuine smile touched his face. It transformed him. All right, he said. Together. He crawled in first, then helped her and the children inside. It was a small, cramped space, smelling of damp earth. At the back of the cavern, there was a heavy, iron-bound chest. It wasn't buried. It was just sitting there, waiting. The gold, her husband's legacy, her family's curse. Stay here with the girls, Silas said, pulling a small crowbar from his belt. Keep them quiet. He set to work on the lock. It was old and rusted. After a few moments of straining, it broke with a loud crack. The sound echoed in the small space. Outside, a voice called out, I know you're in there, Kane. It's over. Give me the box, and I'll let the woman and her children walk away. It was Thorn. They had found them. Silas ignored him. He threw open the heavy lid of the chest. Alara leaned forward, her heart pounding, expecting to see the gleam of gold bullion. But the chest wasn't filled with gold. It was filled with ledgers, stacks of accounting books bound in leather, and on top of them, a single ornate silver-backed pistol. Silas picked it up, his expression unreadable. What is this? Alara whispered. Where's the gold? There never was any gold, Silas said, his voice tight with a revelation. The payroll was a lie, a ghost story to cover up the real crime. He opened one of the ledgers. The pages were filled with names, dates, and figures. This is Thorn's real business. He's been using the railroad to run a protection racket for years. Extortion, blackmail, it's all in here. This is his entire operation. Her husband hadn't been a thief. He'd been a whistleblower. He'd stumbled onto Thorn's secret and created the story about the stolen gold to get these ledgers away from him, to hide them until he could expose him. The X on the map wasn't for a treasure. It was for the truth. He was trying to do the right thing, Alara said, a wave of pride and sorrow washing over her. And it got him killed, Silas finished grimly. Thorn must have found out he had the evidence. He couldn't risk it coming to light. The fever. Was it really a fever, Alara? Or did someone help it along? The blood drained from her face. Her husband's sudden, violent illness. The way the town doctor seemed helpless, confused. It hadn't been a fever. It had been poison. Her husband hadn't died. He'd been murdered. Come out, Kane. Thorn's voice was closer now, impatient. Last chance. Silas looked at the ledgers, then at the silver pistol in his hand. He checked the cylinder. It was fully loaded. He looked at Alara, his eyes hard as steel. Your husband left one other thing. A message. He pointed to an inscription on the pistol's grip. It was a single name, J. Miller, U.S. Marshal. He wasn't just a Pinkerton, Silas breathed. He was working undercover for the Marshals. He was building a federal case against Thorn. He looked up at Alara. This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about justice. He handed her the smallest of the ledgers. No matter what happens, you get this to the sheriff. You tell him everything. This is Thorne's confession." He tucked the silver pistol into his belt. "Stay here until it's over." He started to crawl out of the cavern, but she grabbed his arm. "You said together." He stopped. He looked back at her fierce, determined face. He saw the mother bear protecting her cubs. He saw the strength the whole town had overlooked. He nodded slowly. "All right, together." The plan was simple and insane. Ilara took her daughters to the deepest part of the cave, whispering for them to stay hidden no matter what they heard. Then she took the heavy iron lid of the chest and positioned it near the entrance. Silas crawled out, holding the rest of the ledgers. "Thorne," he yelled. "You want your books? Come and get them." He threw the ledgers out into the clearing, scattering them on the ground. Thorne and his 2 remaining men stepped out from behind the trees, their guns raised. Thorne, a big man with a cruel, scarred face, laughed. "Always the showman, Kane. I should have known you wouldn't come quietly." "It's over, Thorne," Silas said, his hands raised. "The whole town knows who I am. The sheriff is on his way. You can't cover this up." "The sheriff?" Thorne sneered. "That small-town fool is the least of my worries." He gestured with his rifle. "Now, where's the woman? And the last ledger?" As he spoke, Ilara, acting on Silas's signal, shoved the heavy iron lid with all her might. It slid down the rocky slope, gaining speed, and crashed into the legs of one of Thorne's men. He screamed and went down, his rifle clattering on the rocks. In that split second of distraction, Silas moved. He drew the Silver Marshal's pistol and fired. The second gunman dropped, clutching his shoulder. Thorne, enraged, swung his rifle toward Silas and fired. But Silas wasn't there. He had dived behind a boulder. Ilara scrambled out of the cave, her own small revolver in her hand. She fired at Thorne, the shot going wide, but it was enough. It made him turn his attention to her. "You!" he roared, raising his rifle. It was the opening Silas needed. He came up from behind the rock and fired again. The shot was true. Thorne staggered back, a look of shock on his face, and fell to the ground. Silence. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air. It was over. They stood there, breathing heavily, as the sound of approaching horses grew louder. It was the sheriff and a posse from the town. Jeb, it turned out, had woken up and run straight to them, babbling about a gunfight and a hidden treasure, hoping to save his own skin. The sheriff took one look at the scene. The scattered ledgers, the wounded men, Thorne lying still on the ground, and then looked at the silver pistol in Silas's hand. He saw the U.S. Marshal inscription. He understood. The aftermath was a storm of its own. Federal marshals arrived. The ledgers exposed a web of corruption that reached all the way back to the railroad boardrooms in the east. The town, which had once scorned Ilara, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and shame. She wasn't the widow. She was the woman who had helped bring down a kingpin. Her husband wasn't a thief. He was a hero. Jeb was arrested as an accomplice, his cowardly betrayal earning him a long prison sentence. Thorne's men talked, and the full story of the murder and the cover-up came out. Justice, slow and grinding, had finally arrived. Silas stayed. His work for the Pinkertons was over. The marshals offered him his friend's position, but he turned it down. He said he was tired of hunting. He said he'd found a place he wanted to put down roots. He finished rebuilding the cabin, stronger than before. He tilled the small plot of land, planting seeds for a new season. He taught the girls how to fish in the creek and how to read by the firelight. He never spoke of the violence, of the man he used to be. He just was. A father. A partner. One evening as the sun set, they sat on the porch, watching the girls chase fireflies. The whispers in town had changed. Now they spoke of the quiet cowboy and the Apache woman's family with a grudging respect. "They'll never bother you again," Silas said quietly. "I know," she said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. The trust she'd been so afraid of now felt as solid and real as the ground beneath her feet. It had been tested by lies and bullets, and it had held. "Your husband was a good man, Alara," he said. "They were both good men," she replied, squeezing his hand. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with peace, with the promise of a future they had fought for, together. A future built not on secrets, but on a hard-won, unshakable truth. They were a family, and they were finally home. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, and you want to hear more tales where things are never quite what they seem, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You never know what secrets are waiting to be uncovered.